Welcome to Beyond the Plates, Industry Talks by Le Cordon Bleu. In this podcast, we get some real insight into the food and hospitality industry from a variety of renowned chefs, industry experts, and Le Cordon Bleu alumni. Join us as we hear the fascinating stories and unique experiences behind some of the best-known names in the industry.
Hello and welcome. Today I am speaking with Executive Director of the SDG2 Advocacy Hub and Chef's Manifesto, Mr. Paul Newnham. Thank you so much for joining us today.
No, thank you. It's so great to be with you.
How's it going?
I'm well. I am coming off the holiday break, and so feeling very refreshed and recharged and ready to go for 2023. I'm at the moment living on the other side of the earth, so in Australia, and so we're in the middle of summer. So it's been 30 degrees today, sunny, and I live not far from the beach, so life is good.
Fantastic. That's really good to hear. Yeah, it's very different from where I am in London. Right now I've got my cozy jumper on and I've currently got a blanket around me, so worlds apart indeed.
No problem. Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to be in London in a couple of weeks. I'm actually going to be at Cordon Bleu, so we're doing a session there, so I'm super excited to be on that side of the earth apart from the weather.
Well, hopefully you'll bring some of the sun with you.
Sounds good.
So let's start off. If you can tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, and what you've done.
Yep. Okay. So, as you introduced me, my name's Paul Newnham. I am the Executive Director at the SDG2 Advocacy Hub, which stands for the Sustainable Development Goal 2 Advocacy Hub. And we host a range of initiatives, including the Chef's Manifesto, which I kind of coordinate. And so my career has been involved in working around the world, helping to connect people with issues around sustainable development. And when we talk about that, we're talking about ways in which we can think more sustainably and also look at the way to ensure everyone has access to the same sorts of rights and elements that they need to thrive. And so I, in my role, coordinate and connect people around that. And so we developed the Chef's Manifesto as a chef-led project to bring together over 1,000 chefs around the world to really deliver a sustainable food system, because we know chefs every day are involved in the kitchen. They make decisions, they are able to make choices, even if they're just starting out, right through to running the kitchen. They have different levels of choices they can make in what they put on a plate, how they construct it, how they utilize the ingredients, what ingredients they use, where they purchase them from. All of these things are really important, and they actually drive change. And chefs also can really bridge that kind of gap sometimes between where our food's produced in farms often around the world to the fork where people actually eat it. And so chefs can do that in such an interesting way. And so we created this framework called the Chef's Manifesto, which empowers chefs with a framework that is tied to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And the Sustainable Development Goals are simply a plan that was developed for the world in 2015 by all the world leaders and signed on to address some of the biggest challenges we face globally. And in that, there's a number of different points, and we've developed with chefs a framework of simple, practical action that chefs can take to really drive change around 8 thematic areas. And so it's kind of got these 8 areas, and then it's got actions chefs can take in their kitchen, and it creates a framework for a conversation.
Fantastic. And I think that's really interesting, as you know, reading up on what the hub and what Chef's Manifesto is all about. You kind of don't realize how much power a chef has to drive change and create trends, and it really does come from what they decide, you know, to put on their menu, to put on their plates. And I think it's fantastic that you're empowering chefs to do that. Indeed.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think chefs have this amazing role where they're able to really make these choices that can make an impact. And there's so many different types of chefs. Chefs work in all kinds of parts of industry. They work in very different ways, from food development, developing food that's then provided through many different places, to coming up with school meals and working in corporate catering, and to fine dining and doing a lot of innovation and trying to kind of look at different cuisines and flavors and tastes. I was speaking to a chef this morning, and she was telling me about work she's trying to do around textures of plant-based cuisines and how to get the texture right in different, kind of dishes that she's making, where, using plants in different ways. And, so there's lots of work there where chefs can work to really drive change. And I think having a framework for them to connect to some of the bigger issues enables them also a seat at the table to actually be able to contribute in a practical way about what they're working on.
So how can chefs kind of get involved? How can they have a part in the conversation?
So, I mean, chefs can very much, I'm a big believer that you don't need to wait to be asked. It's about looking at frameworks and then saying, how do we apply? And so the Chef's Manifesto is a bit of a toolkit for chefs who want to get started on that. They can take the framework. There's a network of chefs that they can talk to and work with to actually drive change in their local, situation. And so what I believe that can happen in that is that chefs are able to just kind of make choices. They can make choices around, for example, biodiversity. What sorts of ingredients do they use? How do they do that? This has been something that's really, I think, interesting for chefs to do, is to kind of play with different ingredients, but sometimes cost doesn't enable that. But as we've seen with some of the changes in costs of different ingredients, it's meant that people have to get more innovative. You have to think differently about things, because it might be, profit that you're messing with if you are using an ingredient that's overinflated. I know in our part of the world, ingredients have seen huge inflation, like crazy inflation on certain things, because of scarcity, because of climate, because of transport issues, all kinds of things. And so you have to get super creative about, okay, well, the recipe says this, but what do I put in instead? And so I think, it's about how you practically make choices. I also think there's a lot on waste and energy that goes into food, and saying, how do you utilize and see food in different ways? How do we utilize all of the ingredients in different ways? And a good chef always would do that. They'd use it in stock. They'd break things down. They don't want to waste anything, because that's money essentially you're wasting. But as certain foods got super cheap, people have become lazy, and so food gets wasted instead of being utilized in a creative way. It's kind of cheaper to waste it than use it. But when you look at the overall cost of that to our environment, to everything else, then that becomes really problematic. So I think this is where chefs can really, in the kitchen, make these choices, which actually can be part of the solution, that can actually educate their diners, improve their diners' health, work with their farmers to ensure that they're getting a good livelihoods and succeeding. So there's all these elements, and then helping their staff also think creatively about the future and think about how to position themselves so things are profitable, which is one of the principles of sustainability, is, you've got to be able to improve the livelihoods or get the livelihoods. There's no point being super sustainable and then going out of business. You have to be able to think about that and think about the people involved.
Sure, yeah. And how much does it depend on where someone is located in terms of how they look at food? I suppose, seasonality must be a big part of it, in terms of, how you approach what you're serving, what you're bringing to your diners, what you're putting on your menu. And is that something that kind of is addressed with the kind of toolkit that's available to chefs?
Yeah, so we have different elements in the toolkit. One of them is celebration of local and seasonal food. And that's not saying that you must eat local or you must only eat seasonal, but it says that we should celebrate local food, food that's grown in the space, and help people to appreciate that. And then at the same time, also seasonality. And when you think about local and seasonal, you're going to have more freshness, you're going to have better footprint, you're going to have more quantity, it's probably going to be more affordable. And so all of those things are all better as well. And so seasonality is really key. I think the world has become where everyone wants the same thing all, wherever they go at any point in the year, even though seasonality, and we've managed to use science to kind of, and technologies to help us to be able to do that. The challenge is it's not necessarily the most sustainable. And so, getting people to think more and eat more is a really good idea.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even as an average consumer, the more, with how much information is available at any point in time, through the internet, I'm definitely being more mindful about what I'm eating. Like, I don't need to eat avocados every week, that sort of thing. You can save money and, be a bit more sustainable just kind of by trying as much as you can to eat the seasons. And I think, as much as professional chefs can do that, I think everyone can do that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think a lot of these principles and a lot of the chefs engage, they say, this is really about a food manifesto. It's a way that you can think about the way that you eat and the way that you engage. And chefs just have more of an opportunity or more of a responsibility to really make some of those things happen. But it is a framework that's accessible and available. And that's something I think, every one of us can get involved in.
Yeah, for sure. And I suppose, we all like to know what all the top chefs are cooking, and they can kind of lead the way from that point, because we're all going to follow those trends, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's where, I think there's a lot of people, even with COVID, you saw huge amounts of people start to really, think about cooking themselves. I think sourdough bread went through the roof, in terms of people doing it. And I think what that reflects is time, our busy world that we live in, we look for convenience in a lot of our foods and the way our lifestyles are generally, and food's no different. And so, for me, one of the things is how do we kind of drive that forward, and how do we learn about the fact that we don't have to kind of miss out in doing so. So there's a lot of ways in which we kind of can think about sustainability, but also have flavor, have convenience, have all of these things. And chefs are really good at teaching us the techniques, helping spark our imagination, all of those kinds of ideas. So,
yeah, I mean, you mentioned COVID. I think that had a strange effect on how people looked at the impact we have on the planet, with all the, there was that amazing time when all the nature kind of returned to certain areas. And I think in a weird way that really gave people an idea of why we need to change some of our behaviors, really.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, so for me, that's a really, an interesting way for us to kind of approach, food, is to start to sort of look at how can we celebrate it? How can we really understand where it comes from, ask the right questions about it, think about and learn about seasonality, look at alternates, look at biodiversity. And the principles that are there in the Chef's Manifesto, I think, really enable us to have that conversation. And that can be for any eater anywhere, or any budding home chef, to actually apply them. And I've had lots of people do that. I mean, at the moment, we're doing a lot of work around a campaign called Beans is How, which has just launched. And we're talking about beans, peas, and legumes. And, I've been doing huge amounts of learning around that just in my own kitchen, working on different soak times, different ways to put them together, different types of varieties of beans, replacing other animal proteins in traditional dishes. What does that look like? How do you do it? I was talking to a chef on Instagram just recently, and she was talking about using beans in ceviche, and how to use beans to try and ceviche in different ways. And there's so many really cool innovations when you sometimes even just pick an idea like beans, peas, and lentils and say, how do I eat more of them this year? And then you kind of pull that into these other principles, and you think about what you're doing and think about seasonality and what's around. And I think once you start opening that creativity, the kitchen becomes like full of opportunity, and it becomes interesting, and you spend more time engaging in food. And I think that to me is something that's really important, and something important to make sure that, you know, if we're going to try and change the world, it's got to taste better, it's got to be easier, it's got to be enjoyable. It doesn't have to be sort of like take your medicine. It's got to be the opposite of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, funnily enough, I grew up in a vegetarian household when there wasn't really the huge amounts of fake meat replacement kind of stuff. So beans is definitely how. I'm well versed in beans and lentils from growing up, and they're great. They're really great. There's such a variety of beans. I think probably especially in Britain, when you say beans, people think baked beans just immediately. And you know, there's so much more available than that. But what I was curious with that is because, you know, personally, I use a lot of dried beans and canned beans. That's the most efficient way, you know, to have that sort of thing. I mean, and those are obviously not grown here, I assume. I mean, does that impact on how sustainable it is? I mean, from particularly from my point of view, being in Britain, you know, is getting the dry and the canned stuff, does that outweigh the impact that, for example, using animal proteins would have?
Yeah. Look, I mean, it's an interesting question on that, and we're working quite closely with a whole scientific advisory group to try and look into giving us really the facts around that, because I think it's really important to be well informed. You know, when you stack them up against each other, we were looking at with a very reputable university who's done a study on the climate impacts of different food groups, and they've looked at food groups all across the UK, thousands of different groups, and they can analyze them on health and climate. And they, for example, looked at things like sausages, and they said all of the plant-based sausages rate better on climate by, like, in the bottom section, depending on the amount of salt and the amount of sugar that's added to them will depend on the health spectrum. But you can kind of universally start to look at this kind of stuff and understand that there is a benefit climate-wise. It's partly because when you look at animal proteins and you group them, there's very different ways that they're grown. And sometimes that can be very sustainable, and other times it can be very unsustainable. So regenerative agriculture is with cattle is done in a very regenerative way that helps the soil. Feedlots are the opposite of that. They're really bad. So even within categories of food, you have good and bad, and it doesn't, and that can get confusing for an eater to go, well, should I be eating it or should I not? And I think that the reality is there's certain foods, you know, you need to have a diverse diet. That's a principle that everyone should try and have. Is more diversity is better. But then I also think you need questions about what does that look like. And so there's groups like Hobnadods, which is in the UK, which does, you know, a lot of pulses grown in the UK and things like that. But at the same time, if you do look at that shipping and all of that, there's all kinds of different ways to approach that. And sometimes it's better and sometimes it's worse. It is a little hard to know, but I think overall it's better for us to be moving towards more plants in our diet. That's partly because most diets have more animal-based proteins. And when you look at beans and legumes, it's important to eat a diversity of them. And I think the more you do that, then that's better as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's good. I will confidently continue to eat beans and legumes without worrying too much.
Yeah.
So do you think,
I think they're a very safe bet.
Yeah. I mean, I think so. I've always thought so. And you know, I still feel, you know, imbued with confidence, thanks to beans as how, definitely. So
Good.
Do you think that as we are speaking within Veganuary, as it's become known, do you think that kind of trend, that kind of you know, annual what would you call it? Lost my train of thought.
Focus. It's like a month. Yeah.
Do you think that
campaign maybe, or
campaign? Let's go with campaign. So do you think that helps people make a permanent change, or do you think it's kind of very much just a bit of a health kick? What do you have any kind of experience with that?
Yeah, look, I mean, I would say what it does is it helps like, part of the reason why people don't change their diet is because it's convenient. Do you know what I mean? And they enjoy it. They enjoy what they eat. And so in order to get people to think differently about food, you've got to get them to try different things. And getting people to try stuff is a behavior change. It's like it's a choice. You've got to get them to be inspired. You've got to have it in front of them. And so for that, you need motivation. And motivation can be they're in the right place. It looks amazing. The chef put it on the table, and so they want to try it. But what I think is things like veganuary, I can't even pronounce it tonight. Is great, is because what it does is it enables people to try something different, to be a bit outside their comfort zone. So when they do go out for a meal, they go, oh, maybe I should try that, or maybe I should try that, and then that helps to normalize. Helps people to think differently about the food choices they make and realize that they're not missing out. Because I think often we think about, food choices around, it's built on this concept of missing out. And I don't think we should be thinking about it that way. I think we're making proactive choices around where our food comes from and how we want to choose to engage with that. And I think, having more people making those choices and doing that kind of thing is not a bad thing.
Yeah,
it's a good
definitely.
thing.
And I guess if you try it for a month and then you maybe think, actually, this is good, and you then retain sort of that behavior. And, even if you go back to eating some meat or some animal products, it's I think the issue is not turning everyone vegan. It's just encouraging people to introduce more diversity into their diet. I mean, one great example from our cafe at Le Cordon Bleu, London, was a jackfruit baguette that was introduced in Veganuary last year, and it was so popular that it was put back on the menu, and it's still on the menu. So it just goes to show that you get people to try something, and they might decide that they actually really like it.
Yeah, exactly. And then, I've seen all across the UK now increasing the vegetarian choices, the plant-based options. You go into any restaurant, it used to be 1 or 2 dishes. Now it's like 3 or 4 options, and they're becoming more mainstream. And I think this is really, really important, because there are so many vegetables out there that are great, and we often see them as a side. We often see them as not the main thing. And I think the reality is there's so many amazing dishes which are plant-based that we can really enjoy, and they also have a better impact on our own health and also the health of the planet.
So what else is so we've talked about Beans is How. Are there any other campaigns happening at the moment?
Yeah, so we are also running. So we're running a number of different campaigns. Beans is How is one. We're also doing a campaign around the global food crisis, and so we're doing quite a bit of work around a campaign called Hungry for Action, which is really looking at how do we drive action around the crisis that we see affecting so many people around the world, around the climate, around food, around price. That's really impacting people. And so we're really sort of demanding that we see action around that we see governments respond in the right way. We see changes in the way that we're responding to the food system, and that we try and fix this, not only in the short term, but also for the long term. And that means shifting some of the ways we produce food, the way that we invest around agriculture, also how we support people in terms of safety nets and the challenges around that. So that campaign's kind of launched and really calling on governments to really act around that. We've seen some good action in some parts of the world, but it's still very challenging for the majority of people, and there's a lot of people still really suffering and hungry as a result. And so that's one campaign. And then we also, this year is also the International Year of the Millets. And so it's a campaign that's a UN campaign globally around millets, why they're so good. So there's a lot of different sub-campaigns and campaigns that are there. But, the overall theme there is, a healthy food system that's good for people and planet, that provides kind of good food for all. And then within that, we want chefs to be advocates. We want others to be advocates around that. And there's simple actions people can take, things like eating beans.
Fantastic. And how can people get involved if they want to get involved? Chefs or
Yeah, so I would say if you're a chef, and have a look at the Chef's Manifesto at chefsmanifesto.com. Follow us on Instagram, follow us on the social channels. We share a lot of inspiration and insight of chefs from around the world that are really driving change. But you can pick up the Chef's Manifesto and look at the action plan and really look at that, read it, and take it to your kitchen. Have a chat with some other chefs and say, how can we be involved? We then can connect you, once you sign up, to other chefs around the world that are also working in this space. And we can, they can help inspire you as well. And we can kind of work out how do you drive that that passion that you've got forward. We're looking to do a kind of challenge around getting a beans menu on more restaurant menus or more kitchen menus. So you can start working on that. And keep in touch. I think, one of the things around our food system is about asking questions and being informed. And so it's like finding out more information, learning more about your food. You go to do a course at Cordon Bleu and learn a little bit more about, how food can be prepared, how it comes together, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah. Yeah.
Yes, there are plenty of opportunities to learn about plant-based proteins and different plant ingredients at Le Cordon Bleu London. Since you offered the plug so kindly. But, it does.
No, I think it's great.
Yeah, and we do, as you mentioned, we have you coming to see us at the end of this month, which is fantastic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, I think, there's lots of different ways to learn. And I mean, going to school is really key. Getting together with some friends and cooking together is also another way. I've seen lots of stuff, particularly if you have a group of friends who are from different parts of the world. Everyone around the world has different techniques and different approaches, and they bring that to the kitchen. And so you can sit down and kind of say, tell us about a dish that you do, and so sometimes just getting around the table and thinking and learning about food is a great way to then really appreciate it and start to respect it and use it in the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Is there anything else you would like to mention whilst we're here?
Let me just think. No, I think that's probably the main thing. I mean, I would just say encourage people to get involved and check out those websites, and maybe we can put them in as some links below this podcast, and really see what they can do to find out about their local food system and what's going on around them, and then how they can make a difference.
Fantastic. Well, we will definitely include the links in the show notes for sure. And thank you so much for talking to us. I know it's a vast topic, but I think you've given us an excellent idea of what it's all about with the SDG2 Advocacy Hub and Chef's Manifesto. And I encourage everyone to follow you on social media. I mean, Paul, it's great to see that you're so actively involved in all the campaigns, and you kind of see you all over social media. So you don't just talk the talk, you really do walk the walk as well, which is, I think, brilliant.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I mean, it's one of those things about having that kind of integrity of trying to really think, how does this apply in your life? But I think the more you start doing that, and even since I started, the more you want to learn more about it. And it's like, it's not hard. I mean, we had an amazing dish for dinner tonight that was made with cauliflower rice and all these different things, and some, some tofu. Like, it was just brilliant. But, it's not something I would normally make. And my partner did it, and it was just a beautiful dish, very simple. But you sort of then go, oh, my imagination now is like, what else could we do here? And what could we put in? And yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I love vegetables, and I think with just a little bit of the right flavor, the right combinations, you can make really spectacular things, and get past the kind of boring same old meat with some potatoes, that sort of approach to food. So yeah, it's good. Fingers crossed people continue to catch on like they seem to be for now.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, super excited to talk to you today. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Beyond the Plate, Industry Talks by Le Cordon Bleu. Keep up to date with all our news and episodes by following us on social media or by signing up to our newsletter. Links are included in the episode notes. Until next time, à bientôt!